For 12 years I slept on my son's couch and my disability check was the rent. When it was a few days late, his wife called the police to throw me out on the street like trash. They thought they had all the power because they paid the landlord. They were about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between a tenant and an owner, and that sometimes the eviction notice is delivered by the person you least expect. Before we begin, I want to thank you for being here with me tonight. If you believe that a person's dignity is not determined by the roof over their head, and that kindness and respect are debts that always come due, then you have found your people. It does my heart good to see you all here, so please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let me tell you the story. My name is Patricia Jones, and for the past 12 years, my home has been a beige pull-out couch in a living room that is not my own. At 64, my world has shrunk to the size of a queen-sized mattress and a single, overflowing bag of my belongings tucked behind a potted ficus tree. I am a retired home health aide, a woman who spent 40 years caring for others in their homes, only to find herself without one of her own. It wasn't supposed to be this way. 12 years ago, the brick apartment building in Crown Heights where I had lived for 2 decades was sold to developers. The new owners doubled the rent and I, on my modest retirement income, was forced out. My son David and his wife Kimberly offered me their couch. "Just for a little while, Mom," David had said. "Just until you find a new place." A little while has become 12 years. A lifetime. Their house, a rental in a quiet part of Queens, is a stage for the life Kimberly desperately wants to project. She is a part-time real estate agent with a full-time obsession with appearances. The furniture is all from a catalog meant to look expensive, but the particle board is peeling at the corners. My presence, my very being, is a messy, inconvenient truth that clashes with her carefully curated image. My routine is one of invisibility. I wake at 5 before the sun, before anyone else stirs. The groan of the metal springs as I fold the couch back into its daytime prison is the first sound of my day. I tuck my bedding, my life, into a storage ottoman that doubles as their coffee table. I make the coffee. I empty the dishwasher. I am the first one up and the last one to go to bed, waiting until the blue light of their television finally clicks off before I can pull out my mattress and claim my small patch of territory for the night. I contribute. Every month, the bulk of my disability check, which I receive for a back injury from years of lifting patients, goes directly to them. I hand David the cash and he takes it without a word of thanks. "It is for groceries and household expenses," they say, but I see the new clothes Kimberly buys, the expensive gadgets David brings home. My check is the silent, unacknowledged subsidy for their lifestyle. David, my son, is a ghost in his own life. At 42, he works inconsistently as a freelance IT consultant, a job that keeps him tethered to his laptop in a state of low-grade resentment. He sees me not as his mother, but as a problem he is forced to solve every single day. The love I have for him, a vast and stubborn ocean, crashes against the rocky shore of his indifference. He avoids my eyes. He offers no comfort. He is a willing accomplice to his wife's quiet campaign of cruelty. And Kimberly, her cruelty is a masterpiece of passive aggression. She will host book club meetings with her friends, their laughter echoing from the dining room while I sit in the kitchen, pretending to be engrossed in a newspaper, my presence a shameful secret they have all agreed to ignore. She will, accidentally, throw out the leftovers I was saving for my lunch, saying, "Oh, was that yours? It looked like trash." She speaks about me as if I am not there, her voice a sharp, dismissive tool. "I can't have people over for dinner anymore," I heard her complain to David one night. "There's nowhere to put them." The living room is always cluttered with her things. My things consisted of my Bible, a pair of reading glasses, and the worn cardigan I kept on the back of the couch. For 12 years I have swallowed my pride. I have folded myself up, made myself small, tried to be as unobtrusive as a piece of furniture. I have done it because I am a mother, and because the fear of having nowhere to go at all is a cold, constant companion. I have paid my rent in cash and in dignity, hoping that one day my son would see me again, would remember the woman who raised him. I have been patient. I have been quiet. I have been a good guest. But I was about to learn that in the house they controlled, my tenancy was always temporary, and my worth was measured by the promptness of my payment. The foundation of my fragile existence in that house was my reliability. I was the quiet, invisible woman on the couch who caused no trouble and, most importantly, whose disability check arrived on the 3rd of every month like clockwork. That check was not a gift. It was a cornerstone of their precarious finances. I knew it paid for their car insurance, their cable bill, and Kimberly's weekly manicures. My contribution was the silent, steady engine that kept their facade of middle-class success running. This month the engine sputtered. A federal holiday fell on a Monday, and a bureaucratic snafu at the Social Security office meant the physical checks were delayed by a few days. For the first time in 12 years, on the 3rd of the month, I had nothing to give David. "It's just delayed, honey," I explained, my voice full of an apology I shouldn't have had to make. "They said it should be here by Friday at the latest. I am so sorry." David just shrugged, his face a mask of annoyance. "Just tell Kimberly," he mumbled, already turning back to his laptop. He was abdicating as always, leaving me to face his wife's wrath alone. Kimberly was planning a weekend trip to a spa in the Poconos with her friends, a trip I knew was contingent on my money. When I told her about the delay, her face, which had been bright with anticipation, hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Delayed?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "What do you mean, delayed?" "The holiday," I stammered. "There's a backlog. It will be here in a couple of days." "A couple of days is not good enough, Patricia," she said, using my full name, a verbal slap she reserved for moments of extreme displeasure. "I have plans. We have bills. The mortgage is due on the 5th. We count on that money." "I know, and I am so sorry," I said, my hands twisting in the fabric of my apron. "As soon as it comes, I will give it to you." "You don't get it, do you?" she said, taking a step closer. Her voice was low, but it vibrated with a long simmering rage. "This isn't a suggestion. This isn't a favor you do for us. This is the deal. You contribute, you get to stay. You don't contribute, you don't stay. It's that simple." "It was a bank holiday, Kimberly," I pleaded. "It is not my fault." "Everything is an excuse with you," she sneered. "For 12 years we have put our lives on hold for you. 12 years I have had to stare at your pull-out couch in the middle of my living room. We have given up our privacy, our space, our lives so you could have a place to live. And you can't even hold up your end of the bargain." The injustice of her words was a physical blow. My contribution was not a bargain. It was an extortion. The couch was not a home, it was a cage. But arguing was pointless. I was arguing with a person to whom I was not a human being, but a line item on a budget, a transaction that had just defaulted. "What do you expect me to do?" she continued, her voice rising. "Cancel my trip? Tell my friends I can't go because my mother-in-law's government check is late? Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is?" I looked past her to my son, who was sitting at the dining room table, pretending to be engrossed in his work, his shoulders hunched. He was a silent, cowardly accomplice to my humiliation. "We are tired of this, Patricia," Kimberly said, her voice now cold and final. "We are tired of living this way. We are tired of waiting for your little check every month. This arrangement is over. We want our house back. We want our lives back. I want you out." "Out," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "Out where?" "Kimberly, please, just until Friday. Just a few more days." "No," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "Not a few more days. Not one more night. I want you out. Now." The cruelty of it was absolute. For 12 years I had been a ghost in their home, a silent, compliant source of income. The moment that income was delayed by a few days, my usefulness had expired. I was no longer a person. I was a broken appliance to be discarded without a second thought. The unspoken threat that had hung over my head for over a decade had finally been spoken. The bill for my existence had come due and I had been found wanting. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The familiar living room, the room that had been my prison for 12 years, suddenly felt alien, hostile. The air was thick with a cruelty so profound it was hard to breathe. "Kimberly, please," I begged, my voice cracking. I turned to my son, my last hope. "David, please, just until the check comes. I have nowhere to go." David finally looked up from his laptop, his face a miserable portrait of weakness. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice low. "Kimberly is right. We can't do this anymore. It's been too long." He was abandoning me. After 12 years of my service, my money, my silence, he was casting me out with less ceremony than one would give to an old dog. The pain of his betrayal was a physical thing, a sharp, hot poker to the heart. Tears streamed down my face, tears of shock, of fear, of a deep, soul-crushing sorrow. Just 1 week, I sobbed. I am begging you. Just give me 1 week to find a room to call a friend. Don't put me on the street. My tears did not soften Kimberly. They emboldened her. She saw my desperation not as a sign of my pain, but as a confirmation of her power. A cruel, triumphant smile flickered across her lips. You think tears are going to work? She sneered. You've been a burden on us for 12 years. The free ride is over. I want you out of my house and I want you out now. This is my mother's house too in a way. I cried out, a surge of desperate defiance rising in me. I have paid rent here for 12 years. You have paid nothing. Kimberly shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. You have contributed a pittance. You are a guest who has overstayed her welcome. And now you are a trespasser. She pulled out her phone. My blood ran cold. Kimberly, no, I whispered, my voice full of a terror I had never known. Don't do that. You leave me no choice, she said, her thumb hovering over the screen. I have asked you to leave my property and you have refused. That is trespassing. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a venomous, exhilarating power. She was enjoying this. This was the culmination of 12 years of her resentment. She dialed the numbers. 911. Yes, hello, she said into the phone, her voice suddenly transforming into that of a frightened, hysterical victim. I need the police. There's a person in my house who is refusing to leave. I'm scared. Please send someone quickly. She hung up the phone, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. David sat frozen at the table, his head in his hands, a portrait of pathetic, useless cowardice. The 20 minutes it took for the police to arrive were the longest of my life. I stood in the middle of the living room, my body trembling, my mind a whirlwind of shame and disbelief. This was my son's home. I was his mother. And he was allowing his wife to call the police on me. The knock on the door was a sound of finality. 2 police officers, a man and a woman, stood on the porch. They looked tired, wary, used to dealing with the ugly, messy dramas of family life. Kimberly opened the door, her performance as the frightened homeowner flawless. Thank you for coming, officers, she said, her voice trembling. This woman, my husband's aunt, she was staying with us, but we've asked her to leave and she's become aggressive. My husband's aunt. She had demoted me, erased me as a mother. The officers looked at me, an old woman in a faded house dress, weeping silently. They looked at the pull-out couch, at the single bag of my belongings by the door. Their faces were impassive, but I saw a flicker of pity in the woman officer's eyes. Ma'am, the male officer said, his voice not unkind. The homeowner has asked you to leave the premises. Are you going to comply? I couldn't speak. I could only nod, my body shaking with sobs of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Do you have somewhere to go? The woman officer asked gently. I shook my head, unable to form the words. Homeless. At 64 years old I was homeless. She can go to a shelter, Kimberly said from the doorway, her voice cold and practical. The officers escorted me to the door. It was the walk of a condemned prisoner. As I stepped out onto the porch, I looked back one last time at my son. He was still sitting at the table, his face buried in his hands. He couldn't even watch as his own mother was thrown out of his house like a piece of trash. I stood on the sidewalk, my single bag at my feet, and I watched the police car drive away. The front door to the house closed with a quiet, final click. I was alone. The street was quiet. The neighbors' curtains twitched. I had been publicly, profoundly, and utterly humiliated. They had taken my money, my home, my dignity. They had left me with nothing. And as I stood there on that cold sidewalk, the full weight of my despair washing over me, I did not yet know that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had made me desperate. And a desperate woman with nothing to lose is a very dangerous thing indeed. The sidewalk was cold. The world felt vast and indifferent. For a few paralyzing moments I just stood there, my bag clutched in my hand, the full weight of my new reality crashing down on me. I was homeless. The words echoed in my mind, a terrifying, shameful drumbeat. My first instinct was to disappear, to hide my shame. I couldn't bear the thought of a neighbor seeing me, of having to explain the inexplicable. I walked, my feet moving automatically, to the nearest bus stop. I rode the bus for an hour, my destination a blur. I ended up at the apartment of an old friend from my church, A kind woman named Eleanor who took one look at my face and my bag and ushered me inside without a word. I spent that night on her couch, a different couch in a different house, but the feeling was the same. I was a burden, a guest, a person without a place. I didn't sleep. My mind replayed the scene with the police over and over, the humiliation of fresh, open wound. The next morning, fueled by a desperate, survivalist energy, I knew I couldn't just wallow in my grief. I had to do something. My disability check would arrive in a few days. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I needed to find a room to rent, a small, safe space where I could lick my wounds and figure out what to do with the rest of my life. But where to even begin? My mind was a frantic, disorganized mess. And then a name floated up from the depths of my memory. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was our landlord. He was an elderly black man in his late 70s, who had owned the house David and Kimberly rented, along with a few other properties in the neighborhood for as long as I could remember. He was old school, a man from the same generation as my late husband. They had known each other from the old neighborhood, from the same church they had attended as young men. I had only met him a few times over the years when he would come by to fix a leaky faucet or check on the furnace. But he had always been kind, his eyes holding a quiet, respectful warmth. I had no idea if he could help me, but he was the only person I could think of who was connected to the world of housing, of rentals. I found his number on an old copy of the lease that I had tucked away with my important papers. My hand was shaking as I dialed. "Henderson here," a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice trembling. "This is Patricia Jones, David Jones's mother. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Patricia," he said, his voice softening slightly with recognition. "Of course not. How are you doing? I haven't seen you in a while." I'm not doing well, sir," I said, the words catching in my throat. And then the whole humiliating story came pouring out. I told him about the late check, the argument, the threat. And then, my voice dropping to a shameful whisper, I told him that my own son had allowed his wife to call the police on me, that I had been thrown out onto the street. There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. When Mr. Henderson finally spoke, the gruffness in his voice had been replaced by a low, rumbling anger that was more frightening than any shout. "He did what?" he said, his voice a low growl. "They called the police? On you? On Sarah's girl?" He still remembered my mother's name. "Yes, sir," I whispered. "That no-good, weak-spined boy," he hissed, and I knew he was talking about my son. And that hard-faced wife of his. I knew they were trouble. Always late with the rent. Always an excuse. They've let the yard go to ruin. The disrespect. He trailed off, his disgust a palpable thing even over the phone. "Mr. Henderson," I said, quickly getting to my point before I lost my nerve. "I am so sorry to bother you with my family problems. The only reason I am calling is, I was wondering if you knew of any small rooms for rent. For a senior. On a fixed income. I can pay. My check is coming." There was another long pause. I could hear him breathing, thinking. "A room," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "Patricia, I might have something better than a room." He continued, "Listen to me. I'm 78 years old. I'm tired of being a landlord. I'm tired of chasing down rent from people like your son. I was already planning on selling that house at the end of the year. I dreaded the thought of it. The real estate agents, the renovations, the open houses. All that hassle." He took a deep breath. "You are a good woman, Patricia. From a good family. I know you. I know you're reliable. You're quiet. You deserve better than what that boy has given you." My heart began to pound, a slow, hopeful rhythm. I didn't know where he was going with this, but it felt like a lifeline. "Here's what I'm thinking," he said, his voice full of a new, decisive energy. "I want to sell the house. You need a home. I don't want to deal with banks, and you probably can't get a mortgage on your income anyway. So let's cut out the middleman." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "What if you bought the house? From me. Directly?" I gasped. "Mr. Henderson, I couldn't possibly. I have no money. No savings." "You have your check coming," he said, his voice firm. "And you have your good name. That's enough for me. We can do an owner financing deal. I'll be the bank. You give me that check of yours as a down payment, a show of good faith. And we'll set up a monthly payment that you can afford, something less than what those two were supposed to be paying me in rent." My lawyer can draw up the papers. It's clean. It's simple. I get a reliable payment every month without the headaches, and you get a home. You're home. I stood in my friend Eleanor's kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, my mind reeling. It was an offer of such profound, unexpected grace that it felt like a miracle. It was a solution so perfect, so poetic that I could never have dreamed of it. He was offering me not just a roof over my head but a kingdom. The very kingdom from which I had just been exiled. Tears streamed down my face again, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a hope so fierce it burned. "Yes, Mr. Henderson," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Yes. I would like that very much." The tide had turned. The game had changed. And the woman who had been thrown out onto the street was about to come back and knock on the front door, not as a beggar but as the landlord. The week that followed was the most surreal of my life. I felt like a spy living a secret parallel existence. To my son and his wife I was a non-entity, a problem that had been successfully discarded. I did not call them. They did not call me. I imagined they assumed I had found a room in some sad, run-down boarding house, or worse, that I was in a shelter. My disappearance was a relief to them, a problem solved. Meanwhile, my real life was a whirlwind of quiet, purposeful activity. I met with Mr. Henderson and his lawyer, a kind, no-nonsense man who looked at me with respect. We sat in his small, book-lined office, and he explained the owner financing agreement in simple terms I could understand. It was exactly as Mr. Henderson had proposed. The house would be legally mine. I would make a small down payment, and then a fixed monthly payment directly to Mr. Henderson for the life of the loan. The interest rate was fair, the terms were clear. It was a lifeline, a tangible, legally binding miracle. My disability check arrived on Friday. The first thing I did was go to the bank and get a cashier's check for the down payment, just as we had agreed. The rest I deposited into my own new bank account, an account to which my son had no access. The signing took place the following Monday. I sat at that polished conference table, my hands steady, and I signed my name to the deed. Patricia Jones, owner. The words seemed to hum with a quiet, incredible power. Mr. Henderson shook my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Congratulations, Patricia," he said, a warm smile on his face. "You're a homeowner." I walked out of that lawyer's office holding a set of keys and a copy of the deed to the house where I had slept on a couch for 12 years. I was not just a homeowner. I was a landlord. And I had tenants who were 2 weeks behind on their rent. My lawyer had already drafted the second document for me. A formal, legal, 30-day eviction notice. It was addressed to David and Kimberly Jones. It cited non-payment of rent and the landlord's intent to occupy the property. It was ironclad. For 2 days I held on to that notice. I stayed at Eleanor's, gathering my strength, preparing myself for the final confrontation. This was not about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. It was about drawing a final, irrevocable line between the woman I had been and the woman I was now determined to be. On Wednesday afternoon I knew it was time. I dressed carefully, not in my usual faded house dress, but in my Sunday best, a simple but elegant navy blue dress I had saved for special occasions. I did my hair. I stood up straight. I was not going to them as a victim. I was going to them as the owner of the property. I took a taxi to the house. My house. As I walked up the familiar path, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. I rang the doorbell, the sound echoing in the quiet afternoon. Kimberly answered the door. She was in her yoga pants, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. When she saw me, her face, which had been relaxed, twisted into a mask of pure, venomous annoyance. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, not even bothering to hide her contempt. "I thought we made it clear you are not welcome here. Are you here to beg?" "No, Kimberly," I said, my voice even and steady, a voice she had never heard from me before. "I am not here to beg." David appeared behind her, drawn by our voices. His expression was one of wary irritation. "Mom, you can't be here," he said. "You need to leave." "I am not your mother," I said, looking him directly in the eye, my voice as cold as steel. "I am your landlord. And you are late with the rent." They both stared at me, a look of utter, uncomprehending confusion on their faces. Kimberly actually laughed, a short, ugly, humorless bark. "Her landlord? What kind of senile nonsense are you talking about now?" Have you completely lost your mind? I didn't say another word. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded eviction notice. I held it out to them. This, I said, my voice ringing with a quiet, unbreakable authority, is a legal notice to vacate the premises in 30 days. I have purchased this property. The deed was recorded with the city this morning. I am the new owner. I placed the document in Kimberly's limp, unresisting hand. And then I held up the set of keys, the keys Mr. Henderson had given me, and I let them jangle softly in the quiet air. It was the sound of victory. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of my new life beginning. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. It was a silence born of pure, unadulterated shock. David and Kimberly stood frozen in the doorway, their faces a tableau of disbelief. They stared at the legal document in Kimberly's hand as if it were a venomous snake. Kimberly was the first to recover, her shock curdling into sputtering rage. "This is insane," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're lying. This is some kind of pathetic trick. You can't have bought this house. You're broke. You're nothing." "I suggest you call Mr. Henderson," I said calmly, my voice unwavering. "He can confirm the details of the sale. Or you can call the county clerk's office. The deed is a matter of public record." David, his face ashen, fumbled for his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely dial the number. He put the phone on speaker and we all heard Mr. Henderson's gruff voice answer. "Mr. Henderson," David stammered. "It's David Jones. My mother is here. She's saying she bought the house. This is a joke, right?" "There's no joke, son." Mr. Henderson's voice boomed from the small speaker, cold and final. "The house is sold. The deal is done. Patricia Jones is your new landlord. I suggest you pay her the rent you owe. Now don't call me about this again. It's her property, her business." He hung up. The color drained from Kimberly's face. The fight went out of her, replaced by a look of utter, hollow horror. The reality of their situation, the sheer, impossible reversal of fortune, was crashing down on them. The woman they had thrown out onto the street, the woman they considered less than nothing, now held their entire world in the palm of her hand. "How?" Kimberly whispered, her voice a reedy, defeated sound. "How could you possibly?" "It turns out," I said, allowing myself a small, cold smile, "that a lifetime of good character is its own form of credit. Something you two wouldn't understand." I looked at my son, at the man who had watched as I was escorted from his home by the police. His face was a wreck of shame, regret, and a dawning, pathetic terror. He had made his choice. He had chosen his wife's cruelty over his mother's love. He had chosen a life of shallow appearances over a foundation of decency. And now the bill for that choice had come due. "The notice gives you 30 days, I said, my voice now all business. "I expect the property to be left in a clean and undamaged condition. I will be changing the locks on the 1st of next month. A security deposit for any new rental you find will likely be required. I imagine that will be difficult for you to acquire." I turned to leave. I had said everything I needed to say. My victory was not in screaming or in gloating. It was in the quiet, legal, and absolute finality of the document now clutched in Kimberly's hand. As I walked down the path, I heard her find her voice again, a last desperate shriek of defiance. "You can't do this to us. He is your son. This is your family." I stopped at the sidewalk and turned back to look at them one last time, framed in the doorway of my house. "You taught me what this family is, Kimberly," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon air. "A family is a transaction. A roof in exchange for a check. A place to stay based on your usefulness. My check was late, so you threw me out. Now your rent is late, so I am throwing you out. It's just business, isn't it?" I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked away, my back straight, my head held high. I did not look back again. The weeks that followed were a quiet satisfaction. Their attempts to find a new place were, as I had predicted, a disaster. They had no savings for a deposit, and their reputation in the community was now mud. The story of what they had done and of my subsequent unbelievable triumph spread like wildfire through our church, through the neighborhood. Kimberly, the real estate agent, found her business drying up overnight. No one wanted to deal with a woman who would call the police on her own mother-in-law. They were forced to move into a cramped, run-down apartment in a different borough, a place far from the manicured lawns and social status they so desperately craved. Their marriage, built on a foundation of shared greed and resentment, crumbled under the weight of their public humiliation and financial ruin. I moved back into my house on the first of the month. I spent the first week just cleaning, purging the memory of them from the walls. I got rid of the cheap catalog furniture and filled the rooms with comfortable second-hand pieces that had character and history. I painted the walls a warm, sunny yellow. I planted a garden in the backyard. The house is no longer silent and tense. It is filled with the laughter of my friends from church, with the scent of my cooking, with the quiet, steady peace of a home that is truly, finally, my own. I did not set out for revenge. I only set out to survive. But in surviving I found justice. I am Patricia Jones. I am 64 years old. And I am the queen of my own castle.